Something like that.
And I think Wendy's mom actually
But I don't
watched
want
it, was counting up to public that. That's why I was just. So they were like, that's in this whole find it. For me.
And no public comments?
Just like.
There's so many people, especially today.
Public comments, anyone?
It's fine, we don't need them. That's true. Good one.
Oh, yeah, oh, that's right.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I will call this meeting to order and begin by acknowledging with gratitude that we live and work on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish, whose people have been stewards of these lands and waters surrounding the Quellaveam, Bowen Island. And welcome to the Bowen Island Municipality meeting of Monday, July 8th, 2024. And thank you for joining either in person here or online. I'm Andrew Leonard, the Mayor of Bowen Island Municipality and the chair of this meeting. I'd like to introduce, as I do, for folks that are joining us for the first time, the other elected members of our council. Starting on my far left, we have Councillor John Saunders. To his right is Councillor Tim Wake. To his right is Councillor Alison Morse. The lone councillor here on my right today is Councillor and Islands Trustee Judy Getty. Councillor and Islands Trustee Sue Ellen Fast is away, and Councillor Jurgensen may be joining us later. We're also joined by several members of our professional staff team here this afternoon, including our Chief Administrative Officer, Liam Edwards, our Corporate Officer, Sophie Insignia, as well as other members of our staff who may be presenting reports here this afternoon. This meeting is being recorded, and when members of the public speak during the public comment and question and answer period of the meeting, your voice and presence will be recorded and included in the permanent recording, which will be available at bowenislandmunicipality.ca and is streaming live to the world right now on our YouTube channel. This council meeting is an official forum for the conducting of the business of local government. We all love our community. We are all passionate about what happens here. I would ask that encourage everyone to maintain a constructive and respectful tone during the meeting and to direct any comments, questions during the public comment and question and answer portion of the meeting to myself. For those that are following along here in the room or online, if you would like the full council and agenda package, it is available at bowenislandmunicipality.ca. With that, I will look to the corporate officer for the addition of any late items on this afternoon's agenda.
There are no late items.
Okay, seeing none, I will ask for a motion from council to approve the agenda for the July 8th, 2024 council meeting, moved by Councillor Getty, seconded by Councillor Wake. Seeing no discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that carried unanimously. Moving on to public comments, I will look to our corporate officer. Public comments today?
There are no public comments.
No public comments, okay. I guess everyone is here for item 3, which is our delegation from the Bowen Island Conservancy. 3.1, we have Bob Turner from the Bowen Island Conservancy regarding caring for nature. The Quellaveam Bowen Island Biodiversity Conservation Initiative. So if you want to come up and join us here at the front, my pleasure. Mr. Turner, Mayor Turner, former Mayor Turner. Former worship.
Right there. I just need my queuing points here. Thank you, Sophie. So, Mayor and Council, I'm here to, on behalf of the Bowen Island Conservancy, to essentially give you a quick overview of our Caring for Nature initiative. Stepping back for a second and just thinking about nature's challenges on Bowen, from our point of view as a community, we act as stewards of the nature of this place. And It's a challenge to actually measure nature's health. That's just an outstanding issue, constraint. But we always, have to be concerned about the potential for loss by 1,000 cuts. Like the small land clearing here, the drain wetland there, the new road construction here. The collective impacts of those are really hard to measure. And secondly, the big elephant in the room, of course, is climate change. And we know we have coming at us heat domes, we have summer droughts, we have the potential for wildfire. So that sort of sets a context for really what I want to talk about today. We should, though, be really proud of recent conservation successes, and I think that what we've done in the past points forward. The Dorman Point purchase by Metro Vancouver, extending Crippen Park, the municipalities, Grafton Lake rezoning, which captured a huge and a real eco hotspot on the island and put that into sort of a protected area. And then the Conservancy's Wild Coast Nature Refuge purchase. And so as a track record, that's one of the best strings of conservation accomplishments when I look back that's ever been done on Bowen. So we're on a bit of a roll. That said, from the Conservatives' point of view, the question is how can we be proactive, in the face of what's coming at nature? And our mandate is to preserve and protect the natural environment of Bowen. And so we thought something in the realm of a science-based approach that would serve as a blueprint for developing conservation priorities on Bowen. It's what we were looking for. And the Caring for Nature is really our decision to take a long-term commitment to this in a phased approach, where the phase one would be to develop that biodiversity conservation plan. A phase two, with the support of the community, of course, would be to implement parts of that plan. And then the third would be to monitor. And over time, that's going to be a circular affair where you monitor, you learn, you need to adapt. So you then implement something different. Anyways, it's an ongoing process. What we're going to focus on now is sort of the planning piece, which is phase one. So biodiversity, let's just pause for a second, because we hear a lot about biodiversity. There's been a recent international convention on biodiversity. The federal government has its own goals and targets. The province just announced its own biodiversity plan. And we're in a biosphere region whose central tenet includes biodiversity conservation. So the game is all around us. That said, biodiversity is not necessarily a well understood term. At essence, it is essentially all the species and their ecological relationships within an area. It could be Bowen Island, it could be the planet. And the question then becomes, why does biodiversity matter? And it's fundamentally because it measures nature's health. Diversity, the old maxim, diversity is strength, has an ecological parallel where greater diversity in ecological communities means greater resilience within that community to the stressors that come at it. And biodiversity conservation can take different forms. However, most commonly, it is just about holding spaces for nature, where nature can just do what nature does and undisturbed by sort of human, or less disturbed by sort of human activities. So phase one, the central focus of it is really developing this blueprint for conservation priorities. But we can't get there without community support. So we want to raise awareness and garner support for through the community for biodiversity. And as a legacy of this first phase, we also want to create accessible resources. These would mostly be online mapping tools that would empower community members to get curious, get creative, be part of the solution making by having access to sort of information. The way we see this unfolding is an iterative process between community engagement and scientific assessment, where the community engagement piece is really about gathering the values and priorities from the community and then melding that with expert knowledge and scientific data, and in an iterative way, end up with a conservation plan, a biodiversity conservation plan. We've had generous funding from the Sitka Foundation and Nick Nack Nook for this, as well as private donors on the island. And we're doing this in parallel with the biodiversity conservation efforts of the biosphere. And we're looking to be very complementary to their larger, more extensive efforts. And as well, the Conservancy has a memorandum of understanding with the municipality where we work on areas of mutual interest. And this enterprise sort of falls under that umbrella MOU. So our Caring for Nature team, some of them are here today. Thank you. We're really excited by the people that have come to this. When we sort of got this going, it was really encouraging to us to see sort of the energy and enthusiasm of people who just wanted to volunteer their time to be part of this. So I lead the initiative. We have a dozen or so folks who are part of a group of conservation biologists, environmental professionals, communication and marketing professionals, educators, GIS folks, community planner, in enough sort of talents around the table that we've got our finger in a lot of sort of pots that bear on sort of designing this and connecting with the community. And we're really appreciative to Councillors Getty and Councillor Fast for being willing to volunteer to just participate in our meetings and keep us sort of connected to the larger world of the municipality and its efforts. And so we really appreciate that. And Carla Skuse has been great. Thank you, Carla, for getting us the map data and other queries that we've had about sort of what's available through the municipality so that we can build those data into our enterprise. So we started this project last year. We started it by commissioning a report by an environmental consultant who could sort of lay out essentially the opportunities, the issues in front of us, the data available, and the best practices that other neighboring communities are employing in their own biodiversity conservation efforts. And there's a lot of leadership work going on within the Metro Vancouver region in this regard. So it's wonderful to be able to pick and pull from their various successes that are running ahead of us. After that, really the first business was trying to wrestle all this data down into something that would speak to people, speak to us, but also speak to the public. And so taking all that map data and trying to create a series of thematic maps that display the information in an accessible way. And John Dollar's been our GIS guy actually creating the maps, and he's done a wonderful job. And so those are posted on our website, and they're works in progress, but we're starting to sort of see the patterns in the data, which is really step one, what's going on where. Our community engagement got going. Sherry Johnson has been leading us on this, and it's kicked off in May. We had a series of articles in the Undercurrent. We have got our website up and going. We did a small video to explain the enterprise. We have a photo contest, which we're really enjoying right now, where we're really just trying to get the community to show off our cool biodiversity in all its little corners that people find. And we are sort of attending the farmers markets and the various, and we were at Canada Day. Thank you. That was a great Canada Day. We'll be at BowFest. And then in the fall, what we want to do is have an open house, very much, and invite the community and really have that as a key information sharing thing where the maps are up, and we've got all sorts of stations talking about various Bowen's biodiversity. So that will be important. And then following that, we plan a workshop where really this is where we hear from the public in terms of their their values and their priorities. And so out of that will then flow sort of the iterative process with the sort of our scientific assessment. So that's really covers the ground we wanted to cover. We see this as really a pivotal moment for Bowen. We are so enthused by the groundswell of energy that's sort of flowing into this. And we just feel that the Conservancy is committed to seeing this through, and we are looking for, to basically spread that enthusiasm through the community. So keen to answer any questions that you have. And, in particular, we're at the early design stage of this project. So we're open to any issues, ideas that you have that we might consider incorporating into the project or the process. So thank you. And thank you, Sophie, for getting me through that.
Thank you. I'll look to council for questions, comments. Councillor Wade.
Just a comment. I just think this is terrific, and the timing is great because we're a lot of things are in transition in terms of housing and where housing goes, and zoning, and we're talking about cluster zoning. So there's a lot of areas, I think, where this can really help guide us in terms of the decisions we're making. So thank you so much.
On that point, and I'm glad you raised that, Councillor Wade, because, one of the outputs we would love to contribute would be the municipality has the conservation development policy. And as stated, it's an attempt to get 50% of any rezoning application conserved. And the question that we would love to assist answering is which 50%? By creating sort of priorities and also creating like a particular environmental consultant can do a beautiful sort of expose of a particular property and its assets. But what's probably much more challenging for a consultant to do is to essentially integrate that little package into a larger sense of what else is going on in the island. How does it connect? Are there, wildlife corridors that perhaps it might be a part of, or what's it building on in terms of other assets? And so anyways, that's, a potential outcome for the work downstream.
Councillor Saunders.
Thanks. Thank you for that. I feel like my question just got answered. So because I was going to follow up with Councillor Wade's question. You see concrete inputs as being, when you said priority, that's where you kind of got my attention there again. Is that's what I was wondering is, are we going to have are we going to, or can the public expect to see something that says, based on our findings, these kinds of areas, this and this, here's some ideas we think should go forward at those areas if everybody's agreeable to it, as opposed to higher level 30,000 foot, save the environment kind of stuff, like your really concrete things that you're going to be looking at and saying, we think this is important, here's why.
I like the way your first option.
Okay.
Yeah. No, we really want concrete proposals for specific opportunities that exist on the land based on sort of the science. Here's an example. You could take a map right now of Bowen that we have, which is called, Sensitive Ecosystem Inventory. And this is a map prepared at provincial standards by Metro Vancouver, though I don't trust has done them as well, where they do sort of air photo analysis. Then there's a certain amount of ground truthing that has to be done to meet the provincial standard. We have those maps for Bowen. If you sort of just superpose that map on top of the existing sort of conservation areas map on Bowen, you'd come up with an answer to the question, which types of habitats, like wetlands or like mature forests or like ancient forests or like coastal bluff, how much of those areas are protected, in ecological reserve, in parks, etc., riparian corridors versus other areas. And so that's what would be one way to sort of come up with priority lists. And then once you've decided, okay, boy, and this is not true. In fact, we're quite blessed with our protections of wetland areas. But, if for argument's sake, if that was sort of deemed sort of a priority area where we really are at a deficiency, then, you might really scrutinized the map in terms of wetland areas, and put a focus on those. So it will be very concrete, specific, and opportunities focused on, here, here, and here. And I think you said it very well. Obviously, as long as, there is agreements that can be found.
What sort of timeline are you looking at for the 3 phases?
The 3 phases don't really have a timeline, but the first phase does. We're aiming to sort of pull the plan together by 2026. So, yeah. So we are, am I getting 2026 right or 2025?
This is 2024.
What's that?
This is 2024. So 1 year out or 2 years out?
You're good at the numbers. I like that. Yeah, no, we are looking to pull the report together in the fall of 2025. Yeah.
And my question here, given that you're in front of council right now, I'm curious just if there's an anticipation in ways that council and the municipality might be able to contribute, or some of the asks that might be made of us, or even if there's ways that we can remove obstacles that you foresee in your future. What are some of the ways that we can best honor our relationship to the Conservancy so that we can look to make this a success?
Well, thank you for that offer. I don't have any specifics right now. I think what the municipality's been able to do through Carla to date is terrific. Like, we're in the assembly stage right now, but I just know as we sort of advance through this, we will sort of run into issues, and we want to stay very much in touch with council and with staff. Yeah. So thank you, and we would like to take up that offer. Yeah.
Just one quick question. You defined bio as meaning life. So where do the humans fit in your study?
They're in it. We're part of it.
So you're not just going to put nature over people being able to live here.
Well, no, you don't go in with that lens. People live here, and people are the dominant player on the island, without doubt. I don't think there's ever been any doubt that we get the lion's share of the attention. In fact, that's why this project really, has importance, is that it's. And I remember sitting at an all candidates meeting and hearing exactly this, where there was talk about infrastructure problems and affordable housing and cost overruns and blah blah blah. And a comment was made, but at least nature's doing okay. At least nature's doing okay. And the thought that crossed my mind when I heard that was, how do we know? And are we paying attention? And have we dedicated resources to really examine that question carefully? Or are we just sort of running along hoping it's all going to work out in the wash? And, you just look around the planet, it's not working. We just have to do a way better job of figuring out how we can live better. So I appreciate your comment, Councillor Morris. It's an important one. Very clearly, we are in this process to bring the community together around common sort of decisions and common, this is certainly no enterprise to try and in any way sort of wedge and create division. It's really important for us to sort of bring the community along and see the value. And there's so many ways that it can be done. The voluntary side of biodiversity conservation is gigantic. I love this little line that, I remember reading in some place where a fellow said, like, what if we just treated our backyards as national parks? Like, what if? Like, there's 50% of the island. Like, if we could, inoculate that culture in 5% of the folks on Bowen to just treat their backyards as a little nature reserve. And they run it, they're the warden, they're doing the whole thing, they get to do all the planning. But the aggregate of that could be astounding. And much more, in many ways, much more effective and efficient, because people live in most of the best habitat on Bowen. That's the reality. We're down the valleys. You know, the mountains are great, they've got forests and stuff, but if you look at sort of the rich ecological values, many of them are sort of down in the valley bottoms where we live. And fortunately, we've got two big sort of park areas in those valleys. But so I think, you know, what we're trying to do is build that sort of sensibility in the community that this is important. And that could be the biggest outcome of this whole thing is personal decisions to do a better job conserving your property. And people love their properties. That's in so many ways an easy sell, but what are the best practices? How could we do it better?
To Mayor Leonard's question and Council Morrison's question, I think we have to mention here the OCP process, because that to me is the place where we engage the community. We've got really, as far as I can tell, it's a terrific committee working on that and looking for input. And I just hope we get you folks involved and get a sense, you know, it's partly education and partly engagement. So really look forward to that process. Gotta do our best.
That's Wake. Councilor Getty?
So I think his former worship mentioned this idea a couple of years ago before the election. And I started bugging him in terms of, you know, please let me in. I want to work on this. And I've gone to a couple of meetings. I haven't been to all of them. And there's subdivisions and things going on. But I just want to point out to council that this is one of the examples of how we benefit from being so close to Vancouver. Is the talent pool that we've got on this island is absolutely incredible. It's like all the people that showed up for our OCP review and all the people that have shown up to volunteer, and the people that are on this committee and working with the Conservancy are incredible. And it's really, really, really impressive. So plus, I think there's a synergy of energy, and whether the election of this council has given some power behind it, or just the biosphere and that happening, or just general climate crisis, people coming together and paying much more attention to it. But the energy level is very high and really very inspiring. And I think that is part of why they've been able to receive significant funding from the Sitka Foundation. And we've got some graduate students from Simon Fraser that are helping as a result of that. So this is a really, really good project. And you know, we need to, yes, it's definitely of interest to the OCP process, and it's definitely of interest to any kind of zoning bylaws. Sue Ellen and I are both interested in the trust aspects, and I think that we're very, very lucky, and thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I just like the presence. What a gift it is to have an organization like the Conservancy on the island. Given the depth of technical knowledge that the volunteers and the Conservancy bring, and the willingness and our deepening relationship with the municipality has been very heartening as well. And the ability of the Conservancy to translate knowledge into the public sphere in a way that brings the public along, I think is a real asset to this community that is just priceless. So thank you for the work that you brought to us today. If there's asks that you have of us in the future, I think you'll find that we're more than willing to listen and entertain. And if you're able just to give my deep gratitude and my deep thanks back to your board and your volunteers and the folks that are involved, it would be much appreciated on my end.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the conversation and the whole tone of council. It's really lovely. And thank you.
Thank you. And moving us along to the consent agenda. I will look to council for any items that they would like to pull from the consent agenda. Councilor Getty?
Okay, 4.7. And from the letters that we've received, 12.8, 12.10, and 12.11. All of those grouped together.
I don't know, lost it.
12.8,
10, and 11.
any other items that council would like to pull? Councillor Morse.
4.8. And 4.10.
Last call, council for items to pull from the consent agenda. Seeing none, I'll call it. I will look for a motion to adopt the consent agenda, please. Moved by Councillor Getty, seconded by Councillor Saunders. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Aye, that carries unanimously. And moving on to items pulled from the consent agenda, I'm going to bounce back and forth, but we'll go by numerical order. So we'll start with item 4.7, which is land use bylaw amendment to comply with Bill 44, the Housing Statutes Residential Development Amendment Act. Over to you for disposition, Councillor Getty.
So I had a bunch of questions about the charts that were attached to bylaw 657 that described areas 1 to 10. And I've had a conversation with Planner Burgess about that, and he's explained that a lot of the numbers that are in those charts have just been pulled directly from the land use bylaw. So now I've got some serious questions about the land use bylaw, but that's not part of today. So, but in our conversation, he pointed out that there was one typo that I had highlighted, and it's with respect to the maximum coverage of the lots. And this is for your benefit, Sophie, in terms of area 10. That it's 10% of the lot size to a maximum of, the present chart says 500, and it should be 1,500 square meters. So-
Are we in bylaw 657?
653.
Sorry.
There's 5, 6, and 7. Oh, 4.7, 653, that's right.
4.7, bylaw 653.
Okay. And what sections were you talking about?
It is, in the, later on in the charts, there's, let me see if I can find the page for you. It
I don't have
is
page numbers.
4
It's
or
after
5
3.0.
at the bottom. It's, talking about area 10.
Yeah.
100 square meters plus 15% of the lot coverage to a maximum, which should be 1,500 square meters instead of the 500. So it's, at this point, my questions, as far as I could take them, have been answered by staff, but I'm pointing out a typo.
And I'll just look to staff to confirm, is that correct by staff, or is there anything that is needed to be done around the council table?
It's a direct quote from the land use bylaw.
it's
that's
just a
been
typo,
quoted
that's-
improperly.
And then perhaps I can get you to move the recommendation, Councillor Day.
That the Bowen Island Municipality Land Use Bylaw 57-202, Amendment Bylaw 653-2024 be reconsidered and finally adopted.
Moved by Councillor Getty, seconded by Councillor Wake. Any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Aye. All opposed, raise your hand, say nay. Councillor, that carries with Councillor Getty in opposition. Moving on to 4.8 from the consent agenda, draft minutes of the Transportation Advisory Committee meeting held May 28th, 2024. Over to you, Councillor Morris, for disposition.
I'm quite happy with getting everybody onto the multi-use path as far as cycles are concerned. My concern is the use of the word may use this multi-use path. We want them to use the multi-use path. So I would like to say should use the multi-use path rather than may use. So I'm quite happy to move the motion to that small change.
Just one quick thing is, it depends, are we counting the multi-use path as starting right past the wharf or past the intersection?
At the intersection.
At the intersection, okay. So that's because that narrow area where the postage or the mural is.
They can't.
That's tough. Yeah, okay,
Great
great.
talking about. Yeah, I don't, yeah. So I move that council direct staff to install signage and or paint pavement markings to indicate that cyclists should use the multi-use path after disembarking from the ferry rather than riding on the road.
Moved, seconded, not seconded? Seconded by Counselor Wake. Discussion.
There was a discussion at the transportation in terms of if you use prescriptive language, then there's a potential bylaw enforcement problem. So it was encouraging people as opposed to demanding.
Well, should is encouraging. It's more saying this is our first.
Prescriptive. Must, shall, should.
Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, raise your hand, say nay.
Sorry, I didn't get to respond. Bylaw does not have to enforce the bylaws.
Right. Okay. Well, the motion fails regardless with Counselor Saunders, Wake, and Getty in opposition. I will look to council to see if they would like to.
All right, I'll move it again. The council directs staff to, it's got to be installed that time. The council directs staff to install signage and or paint pavement markings to indicate that cyclists may use the multi-use path after disembarking from the ferry rather than riding on.
Moved by Counselor Morse, seconded by Counselor Getty. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Aye. And that carries unanimously. 4.10, the draft minutes of the Mayor's Task Force on Infrastructure meeting held June 13th, 2024.
When is the closing for the path or for the water systems connection projects? The minutes say it has been extended to June 12th, 2024, and that's almost a month ago. So is the closing July 5th as per the municipal website or?
It was July 5th. It did
Oh.
just close.
Okay, all right, so that was the first question. Darn it. Oh, and then the other one was there's comments in here about replacing culverts. So what 5 culverts were being? One culvert is complete, the remaining 4 will be finished before the end of June.
Maybe join us up here, Mr. Graham.
It's 5 culverts that are overlapping. There's been proposed road rehabilitation work. So there's 2 on extension of between Salal Road and Cowan. And there's 2 on Bowling Bay Road. And then there's 1 on Uplands Trail.
Thank you.
And they've all been completed. Paving stuff. The road paving hasn't been completed. Culverts haven't followed through.
I'll move that the draft minutes of the Mayor's Task Force on Infrastructure meeting held June 13th, 2024 be received.
Moved by Counselor Morse, seconded by Counselor Getty. Seeing no discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that carries unanimously. Self-oriented here, we are going to move back to Counselor Getty for item 12.8, which is a letter from Graham Ritchie regarding community center rates dated June 28th, 2024.
If I can add 12.10, which is a letter from Jackie Lynn for the same comment, and 12.11, a letter from Martin Clark with respect to the same comments that, and this, I highlight these and bring them to the attention of council, merely to add to our discussion later in item 10.1 about the rate structure. So other than that, I will move that they be received.
Moved by Counselor Getty, seconded by Counselor Saunders. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Aye, and that carries unanimously. Moving on to section 6, business arising from minutes. We have 6.1, agreement release 1033. Miller Road, Lookout Housing and Health Society. With our manager of planning and development, Mr. Daniel Martin, joining us here. Any comments on this piece, Mr. Martin, or just here for questions?
Just for questions.
With the council for questions, comments, discussion from the planner, or in the absence of any of those, a motion. Councilor Wade?
Move the motion.
Okay. Moved, recommendation's been moved and seconded. Discussion on the recommendation, Councilor Lewis.
Sorry, I was trying to find my email that had my notes in it. The main concern I've got is I have no idea why we would have a clause in the lease. And this is in the third, a clause in the lease that if ownership of the land is transferred, the lease would remain in effect. Any lease that I've ever known, the lease goes with the land basically, unless there's a clause in the lease that says if the land is sold, that this lease is null and void. So I don't understand why we would have that. And I'm not sure why we would want to sell the land since we own it. And so a community asset at this point that should be kept by us. So I'm not keen on that paragraph in there. And then there's a references to CMHC in the staff report. So I was curious about that.
My understanding is they would be funding. They would be like financing the project for the pieces of it that are necessary.
I assumed that, but I thought for the casual reader, they're not gonna know why is CMHC since the grant's from BC Housing. There's a typo, which I assume you fixed in the lease. I did send you that, and in your background B, they've got the grant, have they not, rather than having applied for funding?
Like we've been successful and they continue to be involved in BC Housing, so. Yeah, I think like the grant is not, they write a check, but it's like that you are in the process of developing the BC Housing project, which will result in them awarding the grant.
So they've received a grant subject to
Yeah,
few conditions
Yeah.
of being satisfied. Okay. And the typo in the top, it's Lookout Housing and Health Society, I think, not housing. Okay. And then I was concerned about just changing the heading on 2.0 because there's no more subdivision going in, so just call it cost sharing and other permits. Yeah. So that was basically, and then it will get legal review before it's signed.
yeah, so this is the agreement to lease, right, versus the full-on lease. This is the agreement that says we're reserving the land, we're outlining some of the conditions that would be in the lease. But it's not the formal lease itself, so this is building on that earlier 2019 agreement, which did receive the legal review. We didn't send this one, partly just given timeline and partly because all the clauses essentially remain in effect from the 2019 agreement.
Okay. All right. Oh, I guess my other question was right in the background also. Construct approximately 24 affordable housing units. And yet my understanding is that it's more not non-market rental.
Yeah, the BC Housing grant is that mix of the units, right, where some are shelter and some are rent pure to income
Yeah,
and some are.
But that is all picked up in the
Yeah.
definition of
I
affordable.
mean, our definition of affordable is governed by a housing agreement and all the units would be governed by the housing agreement.
Thank you.
And just keeping track of the questions, I'd like to circle back to Councilor Morris's opening question about just so you get a response to a councilor around the clause of the lease remaining in effect if sold and rationale for having it there, if there is a response.
I'm not clear offhand, I know there's been talks, like we have a strategic initiative about considering housing authority or other forms, so I think contemplation of transfer to another entity. And then my other thing would just be 65 years is a long time. But it's essentially that this agreement would remain in effect if anything were to happen to the land.
there's no harm in having the clause there. It doesn't have any negative impact on.
Well, I think it signals things that I would have no intention of ever doing. It's our land and we should keep it.
I think it's in there. It's all part of us trying to create a community housing organization and have it based on the island. And so, maybe somewhere down the road, this land might get, this lease might get transferred from Lookout to that housing organization. And yeah, if that were the case, sorry, the land could get transferred, so the lease would be from the housing organization to Lookout. And just to give them the security that the lease would still be in effect.
Right, if the land gets transferred to a community housing organization.
And I don't see the word sold in there. I think it was already.
Instead, ownership was transferred and ownership could include sale.
It could, and it might be like what it is now, where it's been on.
Councillor Getty.
So the recommendation that, and the staff report that we've got here, doesn't have alternatives. And my thought, based on this discussion, is if we start making amendments to this lease with respect to substantive changes as opposed to typos, what does that do to the timeline for this project or the funding in particular? Does it jeopardize that at all?
I mean, I always hesitate to speak to them. I haven't heard that it, is imperative, like this meeting versus the next meeting in July for the agreement to lease. Yeah, they were, their goal then was like the lease agreement in place by the end of the year. And once the agreement to lease was in place, then we would start looking more detailed at the actual lease.
I think
Councillor Morse?
so the resolution. So I'm querying the clause in the staff report. It's not in the resolution. The resolution is just the council authorized the mayor and CAO to sign the agreement to lease between Bowen Island Municipality and Lookout Housing and Health Society, period. There's no reference to putting that clause in about sale in that agreement to lease agreement defined.
Yeah, and when I was searching, like that clause isn't in the agreement to lease, that clause is in the council resolution that it be included in the long-term lease. So we would be following that council direction when we draft the long-term lease. But it's not explicitly called out in the.
But it's not in the agreement to lease that we're authorizing you to prepare to get signed now.
Correct.
And it's not in the council resolution you're talking about is one from earlier.
In the June 24th meeting,
Yeah.
that council resolution, you had.
Okay. So I have no problem with signing the agreement to lease. But I do have a problem with anything down, which I think that's why I voted against that resolution. So I'm quite happy to, the council authorized the mayor and CAO to sign the agreement to lease between Bowen Island Municipality and Lookout Housing and Health Society. On the understanding that it doesn't have anything in there talking about a sale, which I don't think I saw. Or transfer.
Okay. Councillor Saunders.
So I've lost track of this now, then, like that clause about indicating ownership land is transferred, which is in the report, but not in the lease. If it's not gonna be in the lease or the agreement lease, where is it gonna be? Or is it gonna be anywhere?
Well, the lease hasn't been drafted.
I understand that.
So the council direction was it be in the long-term lease.
Right. So that's the intent right now.
That's the council direction.
Okay.
So from a process standpoint, I would assume that we're going to be having the same discussion again.
Yes.
Yeah, so let's not have it now.
I just wanted to confirm that, I wasn't going along with that and I didn't see it in the lease agreement and so.
Okay. Seeing no further hands or discussion, I will call the question on this item as it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Martin. Moving on to section 7, bylaw 7.1, water system specified areas and local area services operation and administration bylaw. 59, amendment bylaw 661, 2024. Our Chief Financial Officer, Kristen Watt. Any comments on this item or just here for questions?
I do, through the mayor and the rest of council, we had a meeting with all of the chairs of the LACs on July 2nd about a new proposal for a new governance model for the water systems. I shared with the LAC chairs at that time a presentation, which is very short, and I'd just like to share it with the rest of council now. Please.
The same one that was attached, Jen?
Very, very similar. There's one extra slide. For today, I'd like to just quickly run through the overview of the new proposed model for the financial reporting and stakeholder engagement for the water systems going forward. This process was initiated as a result of council, who indicated a desire to increase its level of oversight of the utility system operations and administration. The utility systems, as we have them, are facing big decisions, big financial decisions, and spending large sums of money on capital projects. So the existing LAC model, as it stands, means that staff do not directly report to council on utility systems. We take proposals forward to a committee. We then get a recommendation from a committee to approve or to a modified approval. But there is no, there's rarely any direct council reporting receiving from staff reports for financial reports or operating reports. So this makes it difficult for council, who ultimately retains responsibility and stewardship for the utility systems. It's difficult to make recommendations regarding utility systems without this direct reporting. So the new proposed governance model, it's going to replace the LAC committee meetings with council committee meetings of the whole and community information meetings. So by removing the LAC committee, what it means then is that staff going forward will report directly to council and directly to community members. And the critical functions that have formerly been undertaken by the LACs, that's the function of receiving feedback from community members and sharing it with council through staff, and overseeing the budget development process and making a recommendation to council to approve a budget or a utility rate. Those two functions will be replaced through an annual committee of the whole budget meeting, which is planned to take place in the spring, as well as annual community information meetings, which will be scheduled to take place in the fall. So at the community annual utility budget meeting, which is held in the spring, it's going to take the format of a committee of the whole council meeting. And each of the water system utility rate bylaws and the operating and capital budgets will be brought forward and presented directly to council with recommendations for annual reserve contributions and user rates. So this committee of the whole structure, it's an open council meeting. It's open to all members of the public. And at that meeting, council will receive information about each utility system directly, and they'll that way have a clear understanding of the challenges and the needs of each of the systems. So council will be better positioned to make informed decisions with regards to utility systems operations and budgeting going forward. Public feedback will be, there'll be an opportunity for public feedback. Of course, members of the public who attend those meetings will be able to give their feedback directly to council at the committee of the whole meeting, as well as continuing to provide feedback either through attendance at council meetings or by email over the course of the financial plan development, which takes place during the spring. Now, for the annual community information meeting, this is a community meeting with staff, led by staff, And this is the meeting that will be replacing the formal committee meeting structure. The structure of a community information meeting is a lot less formal. It does provide for back and forth communication between staff and direct members of the public. We can answer their questions right then and there at that meeting. And we do actually encourage community members to ask questions of us, and even to ask questions about things that may not have been on the agenda, but we do provide that opportunity to explore items that weren't included on the agenda. If we're able to discuss them and we have the information, then we're happy to take the conversation kind of in any direction that a community member is looking to go. So these community information meetings are going to be enshrined in the bylaw. They are in bylaw 259. And with an amended 259, what we're hoping to do is to enshrine additional points of discussion that will be addressed at those annual community information meetings. So this bylaw 259 does require that the community information meeting include the annual financial operations results for each of the water systems. That the meeting will include the annual report to Vancouver Coastal Health on water quality. It will require that staff provide progress reports on capital projects, as well as any new information reports needed on emerging operational issues. We plan that there will be at a minimum 4 separate community information meetings to be held in the fall. We plan to combine the Blue Water Park, Bowen Bay, and King Edward Bay and hold a joint meeting for those 3 systems. 1 meeting for Tunstall Bay, 1 meeting for Hood Point, and a combined meeting for Cove Bay and Eagle Cliff together. So we will schedule additional community information meetings as needed. We want to continue to provide timely information to community members regarding their capital project progress, any loan authorization processes that may be undertaken, and any other significant events as needed. It is important to note that there's no intention to plan to merge any of the water systems with this proposal, that this new model does preserve the specified areas, and that each local service area is going to continue to have its own budget and rate bylaws and accounting for the operations expenses and reserve funds. So what we heard at our meeting on July 2nd that we held with the chairs, we had a mix. We had a mix of positive feedback, of cautious optimism, and some negative feedback too. Some of the helpful feedback really included a recommendation to council to establish cost allocation policies for all of the administrative and overhead costs to make sure that they're set out by council policy so that there's no misunderstanding about how the bulk of the costs are admin and allocated to the water systems. Required steps to implement this new model. Council should repeal bylaw 258, which is the LAC committee establishment bylaw. Council should amend bylaw 259, which enshrines the requirement and the content of the annual community information meetings. We should be undertaking housekeeping amendments to the letters patent, which will provide a mechanism. As they stand, they provide a mechanism to discontinue all of the LACs save for Cove Bay. So amending the letters patent will allow the municipality to include Cove Bay with this mechanism. And lastly, implementation of this new model should include a development of cost allocation policies, which set out the distribution of administrative and operating costs among the water systems. So if we looked at a potential timeline for implementation, today, staff are recommending that council ratify the committee of the whole resolution at today's council meeting and provide 3 readings for the amended bylaw 259, which deals with the form and content of the community information meeting. July 17th, we plan to hold municipal-wide community information meeting to inform all of the water users of this new structure. On the council meeting of September 9th, Staff will be bringing forward for consideration by council a repeal bylaw of bylaw 258, and that's the establishment of the LAC committees. And as we move forward into the fall, we are proposing that we implement the communications and engagement plan and get to work on the new cost allocation policies. The expected outcome of this new governance model is that council will reclaim oversight of all of the water utilities. We will be working towards strengthening infrastructure and asset management, providing better information sharing among all water users island-wide, among ourselves and with council. We hope to encourage more uniformity among the user rates, leading to the development of fair policies for all water systems island-wide. We're definitely hoping to maximize the efficient use of our staff time and to embed annual community reporting requirements by bylaw 259. And lastly, with this new governance model, we do hope and anticipate that we will be encouraging more direct participation by all municipal water users. And that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Watson. Look to council for questions or comments. Councilor Getty?
I'm prepared to move the motion, but I would like to move an amended motion. Or, I'm sorry, it's the recommendations that are in the an amended bylaw. All right.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands, so the floor is yours.
So if I can address the bylaw 661-2024 under section 2.1, in removing paragraph 1C and replacing paragraph 3. We start off with, in each year, the chief administrative officer shall direct the preparation, but then we revert to using in the second sentence and again in paragraph 5 for will. And I think that the comments that I would propose that all of the verbs be shall. Speak to that if you'd like.
Or I look to staff, perhaps the corporate officer or the CAO on process for amending the underlying bylaw and then the motion to bring it to the table.
Yes, so you can make a motion that the bylaw or you'd be amended to from shall to will.
Will to shall.
Will to
Will
shall.
to shall. And then make the recommended motion, sorry, to give reading to the bylaw.
Can I ask for an explanation of what the difference is? Why you want to change it from will to shall?
Let's get the motion on the floor first, if it's moved and seconded. So I would look for just a seconded. First thing I'm going to do is look for like a clear statement of the motion. So the corporate officer can capture it and then we can read it back, get it seconded, and then.
Bylaw as written, section 2.0, under that is 2.1, third paragraph down, says replacing paragraph 3 with quote 3, period. In each year, the chief CAO shall direct the preparation of a 5-year financial plan for each local area of service that indicates revenue and expenses, capital expenditure, and funding thereof. This plan shall be included in the municipality's 5-year financial plan to be approved by council. In doing so, the CAO shall ensure that the respective community water users are informed, given the opportunity to provide feedback. And then 2 paragraphs after that, replacing paragraph 5 with each year an information meeting shall be held by the CAO or designate with the residents and property owners of the water local service areas. The agenda shall include the financial results of the previous year, the annual report to the Vancouver Coastal Health, plans for the maintenance or improvement of the water quality or quantity, capital projects, and other matters as may be applicable.
So just following up on my question again.
I want to make sure. So first thing I want to do is looking at the corporate office and see if that's
Yeah, I just have a simple motion that bylaw number 661, 2024 be amended to replace the word will to shall,
In the two clauses.
will with shall.
Section 2.0, right?
It's the only ones.
Okay, so let's have the motion read back and then we'll look for a seconder.
That bylaw number 661, 2024 be amended to replace the word will with shall in section 2.0.
Seconded by Councillor Saunders. And over to you, Councillor Morse.
I was trying to shortcut whether we needed to bother rather than just unanimous consent. Are you doing that just to make everything consistent with the shall in the very first clause?
Partly, but it's also stronger language, just one small step up. And I think the feedback that I'm getting from 3 people that are in the water districts is that they still very much want, they think this is a really good idea, but they still very much want the detailed public information. So it's just for future councils and that it's very clear that there's very strong prescriptive language for the public information parts.
Looking for any further discussion or debate on Councillor Getty's motion. Seeing none, I will call the question to replace the instances of will with shall. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Aye. And that carries unanimously. And now we are back to still the item, but with the recommendation on the table, should council wish to move it. Councillor Saunders? Sure.
Whereas Rhode Island Municipality Water System Specified Areas and Local Area Service Operations Administration Bylaw 259, 2009 provides for the operation and administration of water system specified areas and local area services. Whereas council wishes to amend bylaw 259, 2009 to remove reference to local advisory committees while retaining the requirements for community information meetings. Therefore, be it resolved that water system specified areas and local area services operation administration bylaw 259, 2009 amendment bylaw number 661, 2024 be read first, second, and third time.
Moved by Councillor Saunders, seconded by Councillor Getty. Any discussion or debate on this? Just comments from the chair. Are you able to pull up CFO's presentation again?
Like share it.
Yes. Yeah, I just want to share it on the live stream. And just on page 2 there. So the major comment that I have for folks that are following this, and this is for me what this move and this change of governance really boils down to is in the graphic on this first slide here, where and this has been my sense sitting on council and sitting in the chair, is that there's a gap between council's oversight of our local utilities and the line of communication that's coming from the community. We know over this last year and a half, and this is extended well before this term, that the management of our local service areas, the governance of our local service areas and the infrastructure challenges that arise out of it in terms of the way that we're engaging with the community and then how we're financing these changes is a big challenge. And when we advance to the last slide, what I'm heartened by is this graphic here, which really puts the onus for the engagement and the discussion and the policy making of our local utilities in the hands of council. It provides a whole lot more sunshine to council about what's happening in the water systems and will allow for the community to come in direct contact with council should they have concerns about what's happening in their local service areas. So through the use of these community information meetings and the use of these committee of the wholes, instead of going before a committee that feels a little bit once removed from council, the opportunity will exist to have the community and have interested parties come before all of us as a council so that we're able to better ascertain what the issues are within each of the communities, within each of the water systems, and ultimately respond to them, because those recommendations, as they come out of a committee of the whole, go directly to council. So I think what this does is it separates the governance of the systems, which should really rest with council, and the information and engagement functions, which have also been married with the committees, gives council the opportunity to really take ownership and accountability over the governance structure of our water systems, and provides new ways and better ways, and I would hope more constructive ways for the community to be engaged with council with the issues that affect them in their local neighborhoods. So I'm very much in favor of this, and I thank staff for the work on this. I look forward to the discussion that's going to unfold in the community over these coming months as we start to implement this new system. And I'll look to any other questions or comments from council or debate on the motion. Councilor Getty?
I have another question. The timeline that's in the presentation talked about the July 18th, the community information meeting, September the 9th, bring forward a repeal and amendment bylaws for council. That's different from the bylaws that we're talking about today.
The repeal bylaw will be repeal bylaw 258, which establishes the existence of the LAC committees. That bylaw will be brought forward on September 9th. The amendment bylaw is actually been brought forward to council today for 259.
Just to set up a different governance model.
No.
That's good.
I'll let
The information?
So I'll let staff answer the question of what the bylaw today actually does.
The bylaw today, the existing bylaw does have a requirement for an annual information meeting. However, it does not set out what needs to be included in the agenda for that meeting. So the amended 259 today enshrines again the requirement to have the annual information meeting, but also sets out specific items to be discussed at those meetings at a minimum.
Any further questions, comments, discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that carries unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Watson.
Thank you.
Next up is item 7.2, 1034 Miller Road zoning, land use amendment bylaw number 652. We have our planner, Mr. Grubak, in here with us today. Any comments on this report, or just here for questions, Mr. Backen?
For 1034, I can answer questions.
Any questions for council on this item here? Council Morris?
Are you going to amend 4.8.4 to include Village Civic?
Yeah, based on what you shared with us, we'll amend that, yeah.
So we're not going to amend that now before first reading.
We'll have to amend that.
We'll amend that between now and second reading. Okay, thank you.
Further questions or comments for the planner? Seeing none, I'll look for council to put a recommendation on the table, please. Councilor Getty?
And can we do it by the what's listed in the agenda, or does it need to be read out?
Yeah, you can move the recommendation. Just say move.
Just move the recommendation.
Okay, moved by Councilor Getty, seconded by Councilor Saunders. Any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Baggett. Section 8, staff reports 8.1, Snug Cove Design Guidelines update. We have our Manager of Planning and Development, Mr. Martin, here with us, and perhaps a few comments on this, Mr. Martin.
Yes, I have here to present to you the draft Cement Cove design guidelines, which are identified in council's strategic plan. So currently, just by way of background for council who may not speak with this, we have in our official community plan. There are two development permit areas in Cement Cove that relate to form and character of buildings. So there's a village revitalization area that's a sort of pinky color, and then the orange color is the village periphery. And the OCP, and I'll say similar versions existed prior to 2011. Development in these areas must follow guidelines in the land use bylaw and are reviewed by the advisory design panel. And we have been operating with the Cement Cove design guidelines that were written approximately 1985 by the advisory design panel at the time and adopted as Schedule E of the land use bylaw. So we've been working since around 2019 to update these guidelines to provide better clarity really in terms of what is expected of new development in Cement Cove. But the updated guidelines, the aim of them is to affirm the arts and crafts approach to development that was integral to the 1985 design guidelines and encourage creative design, complementary aesthetics, and retention of the distinct development character. The guidelines as drafted include 7 overall objectives, each with a mix of mandatory and optional objectives. So objectives being artistic and rural character, community-oriented, human-scale design, pedestrian experience, heritage highlights, natural park ambience, and parking flexibility. So the guidelines are here for you today. What staff recommend moving forward is that we would have an open house on the proposed guidelines. We would invite owners in Cement Cove and the general public and to provide comment on the guidelines. We had an open house with them at the start of the process, but we want to bring the actual guidelines as drafted to the general public and to owners who would be affected by them. We also recommend consultation with Heritage Commissions, specifically on Objective 5, which references heritage character and things on the Community Heritage Register. Staff would prepare the amendment bylaw, bring back the first reading for referral to Alliance Trust. There's the amendment bylaw going on to second and third reading and adoption. And I'll just note on the next steps too, in terms of timing, we would anticipate doing the open house in the fall. We know it can be challenging for owners in Cement Cove over the summer, so we'd be looking for doing it in a slower season, but so the recommendation is before you in terms of holding the open house, referring it to the Heritage Commission, and then to come back with amendment bylaws.
Of course.
I just got the last part of the recommendation. So draft the bylaw incorporating any public comments or relevant public comments. I mean, you don't, some of the public comments could be all over the wall. You don't want to have to necessarily put an opinion. And somebody can go back and say, you said the council resolution said you had to put my comment on. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's just trying to say that we would draft the bylaw and then come to council with the bylaw and wouldn't have an interim step where we come to council with like open house results and direction to draft bylaw, but we're looking to draft the bylaw. But yes, understood that, you know, we would at least be presenting all the comments and we'd be showing what we've incorporated and haven't. So if you want a different word to make
Yeah,
that.
and are you going to go back to the ADP between after the comments and before it comes back to council?
Yeah, it's not like formally referred in here, but I think we would be working with them even on just material for the open house. They've been quite involved through the whole process.
Yeah. Well, how about using the word considering rather than incorporating?
Sure.
With everybody?
Would you like to move that as the amended recommendation?
Well, I would just make the recommendation and change that word when I read it.
Yep.
Okay. All right, the council directs. The council directs staff to invite property owners within the village revitalization development permit area and the general public to an open house on the draft Cement Cove design guidelines. The council refer the draft design guidelines to the Heritage Commission for a recommendation. That council directs staff to prepare a bylaw to amend the land use bylaw to replace Schedule E Cement Cove design guidelines with draft design guidelines presented at the July 8th, 2024 meeting and considering any public comments and advisory committee recommendations.
Moved by Council Morse, seconded by Council Saunders. Any further discussion, debate, questions on this item? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Aye. And that carries unanimously. Moving on to 8.2, affordable housing policy amendments. We again have our manager of planning and development, Mr. Martin, here for Planner Strikes Back. Feel free.
So I have today an item that is identified in our Housing Accelerator Fund application as one of our action items. There we go. And so the initiative that was included in our grant application was that we would amend the affordable housing policy to include provisions to waive public hearings for affordable housing projects that conform to Bowen's official community plan. One of the things that has happened since then was that the Bill 44 was adopted by the province, which has meant that we can no longer hold many public hearings. And so largely, many of the parts of this initiative have been considered, and my formatting got messed up, but the first question to ask is a rezoning application consistent with the OCP? And if it's not consistent with the OCP, which should be down here, it would require a public hearing. However, now if an application comes before us that is consistent with the OCP, we have to ask, is the whole development residential? And if it's all residential, then we follow yes at the top, and the public hearing is prohibited. So we can't hold a public hearing for market or affordable housing. The next question would be, is at least half of the development by gross floor area residential? And if at least half of the development is residential, then again, a public hearing is prohibited for applications that are consistent with the OCP. So the only residential rezonings the council could consider waiving a public hearing for are ones where less than half of the development is residential, but like a portion of the overall development is residential. So sort of that subset of applications, what this policy would address. So working with the Housing Advisory Committee a few times, trying to give examples, this would kind of be like the Bowen Island Pub development, where most of that building is commercial, but a portion of it is residential. And of those housing units are actually affordable and governed by a housing agreement. So it's that type of development that would now be being considered by this policy change. So what the suggested language would be in the affordable housing policy would be to add language to say that to support development of affordable housing, Bowen Island Municipality will consider waiving public hearings for rezoning applications for projects that conform to the official community plan where affordable housing makes up 25% of total gross floor area of the project. So that's a quarter of the overall, and in projects where less than 50% of the gross floor area of the project is residential, where affordable housing makes up 50% of the total residential gross floor area of the project. So trying to say either, a smaller amount of the project is residential, but a lot of that is affordable, or just overall the percent of housing is affordable in that project. Yeah, so the recommendation is to adopt amendments to the affordable housing policy. I know that was quite sort of policy heavy language, so I'm happy to take any questions on it at this time.
Look to council for questions or comments from the planner. Councilor Getty.
It sort of feels like a game of limbo in terms of, how low can we go kind of thing. So these are fairly significant changes in Bill 44, and we're not entirely clear what effect it's going to have on the island overall. But this is bringing it down even further in terms of less than the 50%. And you've put some sort of a cap on it in terms of 25% or 50 of 50. So it's still 25%. I'm not clear in terms of what the benefit would be. There's another statement in here in terms of the changes would have a low degree of improvement. But this was the Housing Accelerator Fund application, I believe, and at one point there was a mention of follow-up questions, and that the comment was that this would have very low degree of improvement. So I'm wondering what the advantage would be other than just saving the developer time and not having a public hearing.
Yeah, that's essentially the point of the initiative is to try to signal a more streamlined approach for development that has the affordable housing component. Yeah, I mean, to some extent, I struggle on Bowen to think of projects that this would apply to, given that, but maybe post OCP amendment, maybe there'd be more properties, but would I don't know at this point, but the reality is that many larger residential rezonings on Bowen end up would by necessity require an OCP amendment as well. There's not many. And then given the changes in Bill 44, that if it's strictly a residential development as it is, it doesn't prohibit it from holding a public hearing.
Councilor Morris?
I guess the other key is the words council will consider. So this isn't an automatic. To support development, Bowen Island Municipality will consider waiving public hearing. So we
Yeah, so I think
labored
that,
over this quite a bit at the Housing Advisory Committee.
Mayor Leonard, just to add to that, something the Housing Advisory Committee thought about was okay, how much do you kind of capture it versus knowing, okay, if somebody comes with an edge case where it can go, this is, is consistent with the OCP, but it's quite an outlandish development for whatever reason. Council's not tied to the law. Council can say we considered the policy, but we think that the changes overall in this development are such that we would want a public hearing to be held.
Perhaps it might be helpful to delineate just in terms of what the process actually looks like in those cases, so in the cases where council might consider waiving a public hearing, how does that actually play out?
Yeah, so what we've done since the passing of Bill 44, and even before when there was an option for council to consider waiving a public hearing was the language before, when we introduce a rezoning application, we bring it for introduction and typically referral to advisory committees and to come back for first reading. And typically at that point in that report, we've indicated whether a public hearing is prohibited, so we're not doing it, or whether we're recommending waiving the public hearing. Because if you waive the public hearing, you have to give notice at first reading instead of at a public hearing stage. So it's when we introduce the application, the council would say we would consider waiving a public hearing. So then presumably if this was the case that the waiving of public hearing because it's policy, we'd be bringing a case that said this is the policy, so we recommend waiving the public hearing and maybe have that in the council motion. So it's clear that we're coming back for first reading with notice instead of a public hearing.
Councilor Goodley?
So in the staff report underneath that chart that in the proposed amendment, you're saying to support development of affordable housing, Bowen Island Municipality will consider waiving public hearing. So if that then were changed to may as a possibility in terms of then there's a step and it comes to council and we hear about the proposal and whether it's outlandish or not. We make a decision whether or not it should have a public hearing or not.
I think it's will consider because it's trying to be affirmative. We're saying we support affordable housing, so council will take the step to consider, and not whether or not it's not determining council's decision, but it's saying council will consider.
My understanding of the legal interpretation of shall, will, must are that's peremptory, so that there's not a lot of flexibility. Whereas may is something that gives the option.
Right, but because the second word is consider, it's saying you will consider whether to waive or not to waive.
Human Service?
Yeah, I was just going to re-emphasize that the idea here is that council, will consider, it. Doesn't have to waive it,
yeah.
but it will consider. So rather than saying the municipality will waive
Okay,
or may waive, it's the will consider, it's the consider part that's important.
so according to the chart, supplemental, is at least half the development by gross floor area residential? The answer is no. And council may hold a public hearing or will consider holding a public hearing. And it's specifically, the bylaw recommendation is 25%.
The policy, yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Have I got that right? Have I got that right?
Yes.
Councilor Morris, I did see your hand up.
I'm just gonna say exactly what the CEO said.
Any further questions or comments? Councilor Wick?
The report refers to the, our requirement for our housing needs assessments. And I didn't. In one place, it said it committed that we would have those done by the end of this year, December 31st, 2024. So I wondered why that wasn't ticked in that box, I didn't think.
So the bill 44 requires that an interim housing needs assessment be completed by the end of the year. The province just came out with their guidelines in June of this year, and we're partnering with Metro Vancouver, who's looking at doing them for member municipalities, and they aim to have ours complete by July, end of July, I guess, of this year. So it's separate from this initiative, but yes, we are looking to have it updated this summer.
So I will move that council adopt amendments to the housing policy 08-04 to waive public hearings for affordable housing projects to fulfill requirements of initiative number 3 in Bowen Island Municipalities Housing Accelerator Fund Action Plan.
Thank you, Councilor Morse. Moved by Councilor Morse, seconded by Councilor Wake. Any debate on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Aye. And that carries unanimously. Moving on to 8.3 in Mr. Martin's trilogy, amendment to section 219 covenant, Snug House Code, 1080 Miller Road. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this one is a follow-up to a report that we came to you in May, I believe. So it's regarding Snug Cove House, it's in years housing development on Miller Road. And it is, at the time when I came, it was that Vancouver Coastal Health has concerns with our Cove Bay water and especially the lack of operational water treatment plant, and was requiring a restrictive covenant on the building permit being issued that Snug Cove House enter into a covenant that says that they will not seek occupancy until the Cove Bay water treatment plant is complete and commissioned and has the permit to operate from ACH. So Snug Cove House willingly signed onto that, and we did issue the building permit on Friday. But before sort of commencing full-on construction and taking out their construction loans, in particular, Snug Cove House is looking for more certainty that they're not going to build this building and not be able to occupy it. So in talks with Coastal Health, we're looking to amend the covenant that provides essentially an alternative if the treatment plant is not operational when they come for occupancy, that Snug Cove House can commission and install a supplemental treatment system that's approved by Vancouver Coastal Health that would allow them to seek occupancy permit for the building.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. I'll look to council for any questions from the planner. Councilor Wake.
So if I understand it right, excuse me, this is this idea, I think, was presented at the council meeting where this came up. And the response I understood was that Vancouver Coastal Health would not allow this to be an alternative in the case where it was a large number of occupants in the building, only for a single family home. So have they actually changed that policy, or are they making a exception?
So we and Snug Cove House have continued to talk. So what this is not what's called a building system, where it would be like within the building and operated by Snug Cove House, and which BCH doesn't have authority to regulate, but this would be like a supplemental treatment system that's operated ultimately by Cove Bay Water, and Coastal Health would still regulate it. So the analogy they used is like in larger systems, you could end up, like in Vancouver, you have the giant treatment plant, but you'll end up with like supplemental stations along the way where they'll like re-up the chlorine as necessary. So in this case, it would be, re-upping the treatment and then entering Snug Cove House. But under their regular scheme, that's how it would function.
But it would still be at the expense of Snow
It would
Cove.
be the expenses.
At least it's not gonna be a
Councillor Giddy,
And I think the recommendation.
moved by Councillor Giddy, seconded by Councillor Wake. Over to you to,
Good work. Thank you. I'm glad whoever did it came up with an option.
and to be clear, a system like that would only be in place should the Cove Bay water system.
I don't even say.
Don't even go down that road. Thank you for the advice from Councillor Wake. Any debate on the motion? Being none, I will call the question. All in favor, raise your hand. Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Berger. On to 8.4, an update from our CAO.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So the Carter Bridge bridge replacement project is well underway. The pedestrian bridge, it's a temporary pedestrian bridge, has been installed just downstream of the road bridge, which is going to be replaced. That's all on schedule. And the temporary bridge is interesting, you know. I haven't walked it myself yet, but it, you know, just sort of theorizing the possibility of could we keep it kind of thing, because so that's going well as it can be. The Blue Water water system improvement project, the tender closed last week, and so those are in the process of being vetted and responded to, and it looks promising that we'll have a project advancing pretty soon, hopefully without too much change in scope, because of the tenders coming, or at least I understand one tender came in close to the price, so we'll hear more about that soon. And the community center project continues to move along. We were hearing jackhammering this morning as they are putting in some additional civic works to, one is a line, the actual line to the septic field, which is near completion, as well as the electrical lines to lighting for the north parking lot. We're really down to resolving a lot of the nitty-gritty details on the inside of the building. And unfortunately, the exterior of the building is still under works, getting the roof flatting and some of the hardscaping completed. And we're told by the constructor, though, that they anticipate a completion at the end of this month. And so, you know, fingers crossed that will become a reality. So we'll keep you posted as that moves along. I did want to do a little bit of a shout out to the Recreation Department for another very successful Canada Day reimagined. They continue to expand on this theme of reimagining what Canada Day means to all Canadians. So it's not just focused on the sort of colonialist settler mentality, but it really introduces ideas of reconciliation and contemplative ways to think about how we are on this land as all peoples. And I did want to highlight that the department did receive an honorable mention at the BC Recreation Association this year for that theme of hosting Canada Day. And the same department did also host just this last weekend, autism awareness training, and had 17 participants, not just from our municipal staff, but other organizations attending as well. So just a shout out to that department and the great work that they've been doing. So I'll leave it at that.
I would very much echo the comments about the Canada Day event. I had the opportunity to attend it with my son, and both adult and child had a wonderful time. Very hot, but the content of it was clearly well-considered, thoughtful, and engaging. So thank you, Jim, to you and your team for that. Any questions or comments for the CAO? Seeing none, we'll move on to section 10, reports of committees, committee of the whole and commissions. 10.1, a report from the Community Center Joint Management Committee on the package of policy and rental rates developed for the Bowen Island Community Center. I believe we've got a few folks here today.
We also have other members of the Joint Management Committee who are here to answer any questions. Yeah. But we actually wanted to start off with Councillor Getty providing an introduction to the work being presented in the staff report today.
Okay, just a little background and history. Besides the decades of work that different people have been working on this project, in July of 2020, we got federal and provincial funding, the 7.9 million. In September of that year, we had a referendum on the funding, and the community agreed to an additional $4 million with respect to loan agreement. In January the 7th, 2021, we signed a second memorandum of understanding between Bill and the Hearth with respect to operations. There'd been a project MOU before that. And we established the Joint Management Committee with 2 members of the Hearth. So that's Jamie Sheffer, and it started off with Rob Bloor, but it's now Gail Lotenberg. 2 members of the municipality, so there's Jillian and Mimi Hall, who's representing the Rec Commission. 2 members of the public, so that's Kim Saloti and Fraser Elliott, who's here, and myself as the liaison from council. So that's the 7 members of that committee. So that was formed in January of 21. And it actually came into creation some 32 months later, and had its first meeting in September of 23. Since then, so that's 8 months max, they've managed to pull together a huge range of policies for the opening of this building. So I wanted to say that the Lee Vincent, who was hired in December, first started working in January, and Jillian, who's also the head of the recreation and has a major role to play in the organizing and overseeing the actual construction. And who's got a few other responsibilities, have put in an enormous amount of work in terms of supporting the work of the volunteers in this committee. And the committee members themselves have been meeting a minimum of once a month for the whole committee meeting together, and then weekly and sometimes bi-weekly meetings to talk about the various policies. So it's been an unbelievably busy group, and they've done a really good job. I think, I hope you agree. I worked primarily on the vision statement, and what you see before you now is version 9. And we've gone through and wordsmithed probably every single word. And I hope there aren't any more changes, but we'll see. And we've come together with all of the policies that you will now get more details of. I'll give you dates and times, but over those 7 committee meetings and 8 months, there's an enormous body of work that's now in front of you. So I think if this passes, we're going to be ready to open the doors and herd people, shepherd them once they actually walk through those doors. So, back to you.
So I'll be speaking a little bit about some of the policies, and just starting off by talking about some of the guiding documents that we referenced in order to put these together. So started off by, such as the memorandum of understanding that Councillor Getty referenced with the BIM and the Hearth, Arts on Bowen, our equity, diversity and inclusion policy. There's other best practices guiding documents out there, like the Accessible British Columbia Act and and other municipal documents, policies and facility documents reviewed. So the City of Vancouver, New Westminster, Coquitlam, Centennial Theatre, Presentation House, the Roundhouse. We looked at lots and lots of other documents out there, recognizing that, of course, we are not the first to undertake this type of work. And all of the proposed policies that are before you today were discussed several times at committee meetings and then taken back to the policy subcommittee for review and incorporating everyone's thoughts. So the Accessibility Committee, the Accessibility Advisory Committee had an opportunity to review the accessibility policy, and their recommendations were also incorporated in the version that you see today. I decided to focus a little bit more on the rental policy in terms of going through just a few details, but of course, we're very happy to address any questions regarding any of the policies. But for the rental policy in particular, just a few points to talk about how we were developing this, because there were a number of elements that were important to consider with this rental policy, such as prioritization of rental access to the local Bowen Island community. That was very much stated as a really key piece of why we're building this facility, that the Bowen Island public can get to, has access to it. Recognizing that the theater needed to be treated differently than the other rental rooms in the facility due to the diversity of the types of activities and users and the equipment use. And it's a very different nature than the rest of the rooms in the facility. We wanted to establish a system that was operationally efficient as well as user-friendly. As we all know, there's not an abundance of additional staff going into managing this facility, so we needed to plan something that we could implement with relative ease. At the same time, establishing a system that was fully functional within the new facility manager software of ActiveNet. So we had to make sure that what we were planning actually was doable with the software we're looking at. Councillor Getty mentioned the diversity of the users of the participants within the Joint Management Committee. And this was really beneficial to us because as we went through looking at different types of operations and ideas and types of processes that we might implement, we had the perspective of theater administrative professionals. We had local theater groups. We had programmers from the municipality and the Hearth. And every time we presented a way of pursuing, we looked at it from all these different perspectives, which was really helpful as we put this all together. So those were just a few of the pieces that had to be considered overall as we were developing this rental policy. And essentially the rental policy, with the exception of some of the features that are applicable to everyone, which is damage deposits and how you might conduct yourself in a space, we really looked at identifying these key different user groups and each of the different user groups having different privileges for reserving spaces within the facility. You would have seen in the policy, the first user group were the key stakeholders in the facility. So that being BIM as a whole, the recreation department within BIM, and the Hearth Arts on Bowen. So these stakeholders, we're calling them, can book the earliest, they can book at 24 months, and they can hold a room without putting down a deposit. And there's no financial penalty for having to adjust that booking down the road. With community groups, the second priority user group, they have the next access for booking a space. The deposit is a smaller portion of the full rental fee. And there was a little more flexibility as to when that final payment was due. And this was largely in recognition, of the challenge that some of our user groups on the island may have in being able to pay that full rental fee prior to selling tickets to that event that would take place in that space. So really trying to acknowledge and make it accessible to our community to make that. The last two user groups, the commercial and private renters, they were put together in terms of what the privilege being, and that they were the latest to be able to book at 18 months out. They have the highest deposit that's required in advance, and their full payment would be required within 90 days or at 90 days the booking taking place. So those are some of the key features of it, and like I said, very happy to discuss other elements of it. And we could pause to do that, or Kristen is going to be speaking about the rates in particular, so up to how would like to handle that.
Move on a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit now about the process that we went through to come up with rates. Ideally, this facility would charge rates that were cost recovery 100% of all of the costs to operate the building. And that's, that's cost of just operating expenses. That's the cost of having that minimum baseline staff that are present in the building to make sure that it's open and safe and accessible for everyone, as well as any incremental costs that we as the municipality have undertaken through the borrowing. So any additional incremental costs that we're looking at from giving up all of the rented spaces, but taking on the debt. So ideally, and a contribution to a long-term asset management fund to deal with the life cycle operations of the building. Ideally, we could charge rates that would capture and recover all of those aspects that goes into a cost. I can tell you that when we did the math on that and we saw what those rates would need to be, they're going to be prohibitive. We have to consider what other comparable spaces are in other facilities across the island, and just what is a reasonable amount that a user group could be expected to pay. Of course, we do have different categories of user groups that we have looked at. Not-for-profits versus private versus commercial rentals. We've incorporated all of those different types of user groups into our rate structure. But at the end of that process, looking at a full cost recovery model versus what's competitive and reasonable to think that a group is going to pay. I'm happy to say that I think we've landed somewhere in the middle of that, and that we've come up with a proposed rate bylaw that has all of this multi-stakeholder input and has been agreed upon by a huge group of people around the table, all coming at it with different perspectives. On one hand, you've got me coming at it from the finance, trying to recoup as much from the cost recovery side, and then you've got community theater groups that are, trying to figure out exactly how they can put on a show and still make it financially viable. So the rates are they're a starting place for us. We would like to put a bylaw in front of council that we think is a good place to start, test the waters, see how it goes, see how the rental how the uptake is with those rates, and take it and bring it forward for review from time to time. Perhaps we've set the rates too high, perhaps we've set them too low. Perhaps our operating costs are way out of whack. What we do, there's still this whole fact that this building is based on a theoretical budget, and we do need to be in the building and experience operating the building for some time before we can really get a handle on what those operating costs are going to be, because at this point they're just our best estimates of what they're going to be. So this is our starting place. It has come from a place of consideration of all of the things that you would go in to fully recoup the cost versus what any of the particular user groups can be expected to pay. So I'm happy to report that it's been through a very significant detailed vetting process with input from many, many different areas of the community to separate.
Yes, so you.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to echo what Kristen was saying there. We did look at quite a number of external agencies' rate structures and policies around operating a facility like this, both public and private sector. And thankfully, our committee membership has good relations and participation in a lot of the groups on the island too. So there was a lot of engagement with the user groups on the island I do want to echo and acknowledge that we've had a really good, this is a really good first draft, and it's highly likely that it will need to be amended going forward. As we begin to operate the space, we'll realize that there were elements of policy or rate structures that were missed, and we'll need to amend them. And so this is very much an iterative process. And but first and foremost, we need to get these policies in place to be able to open up the facility to the public, to be able to start using it, to learn how to use it even better.
Thank you. I'll look to council for any questions or comments. Councillor Saunders.
I had a look through the extensive material you provided, and I'm sure we can nitpick some of the wordsmith and some of the policies, and I have no interest in doing that, frankly, and you guys have done a great job on getting us to where we are. Because you focused on the rate structure there, I'm kind of curious, like this is what they do here and this is what they do there. And you indicated in your presentation, but we don't know, or we didn't use those words, but we're not sure if these numbers are gonna work or not. It's really hard to change things when, when people, if we set an expectation that it's randomly $100 an hour to do this, and a year from now discover it's gonna be $250 an hour, it's gonna be really hard to kind of get buy-in for that. And then, is there an expectation that this place will pay for itself operationally? Or are we going to be budgeting something, a significant amount each year that maybe isn't planned yet to keep it running?
I think part of it also is the fact that the work on the recreation policies that we need to do, because recreation policy, existing policy required that direct costs of recreation programs be covered. So direct costs was typically the municipal administrative staff component, and the direct cost was the instructor component, and the space rental. The entire infrastructure that supports the recreation department has always been part of general municipal expenses. So looking at that, if there was some desire to suddenly shift and say, all of a sudden, the recreation department would need to recover a significantly higher portion of costs, then I would absolutely say that there is no expectation that rental fees are going to completely cover the costs for those programs. I think part of the work that is still to be done is defining what direct costs of programming are.
And again, if I may just echo it, I don't think there's any real chance that we will fully cover the costs of operating the facility. I think it was understood all the way along that it would be subsidized by the municipal tax base. And so we'll do what we can to recover as much as possible. But as a majority, if not all, community centers are subsidized by the.
Right, thanks.
And the one more piece that I want to add, which is very different under an ownership model as opposed to a rented model, is now we do have to think about asset management, and we have to collect money, taxation money, fee money, to set that aside and put that aside year after year for the life cycle costs. And that's something that we never had to consider when we just rented spaces.
Councillor Wick.
Is there, have you built in or looked at some kind of volunteer component that could help reduce costs of operating? I think you have just support staff for events and.
Sure. It's and absolutely there's strong opportunities for volunteerism within the facility, and I think our community would respond well to that. To be honest, we haven't had the time to develop a volunteer engagement program at that level of professionalism that you need to launch something like that to be effective. So 100% that there are a lot of opportunities.
Right.
Councillor Getty.
One of the main components that is missing at this point is the programming. For the theater space in particular, but one of the things that in terms of staffing, we've got the facility manager who's been an incredible asset. There's suggestion now in terms of hiring 2 custodians, or at least 2 positions, I believe have been advertised or about to be advertised. But what we haven't had a budget for is someone to fill the programming slot. So the Hearth has applied to BC Arts for a program that will help them in terms of programming. I guess a program that will use the space. And we're trying to figure out whether or not we can or they can leverage that into something that's a little bit more permanent. But that's something that is desperately needed in terms of making sure that we have full occupancy. The other part of that is, we have a population of 4,500, so we have to plan and work on a program that appeals to a much wider audience than just the theater groups that we've been that have been involved in this, that are keen to use the space. But there's different things for families and different things for people with different interests. So we have a facility and we need to figure out how to develop the revenue so that it's going to be a good sized space, bigger than all of the other venues. And if we can get audience participation, then people are going to be able to afford to rent the space. So it's all of those factors are something that we've had to let slide in terms of what the facility itself has picked up as and dreams are for the Hearth in terms of getting some staffing funding, grant funding. So that's another issue that may come back.
Councilor Saunders?
Again, thank you for your work. I'm happy with the recommendation.
I'm gonna go to Councilor Morris
I
first.
just want to say, I'm assuming there are more than just the Hearth that will be wanting to do programming in the recreation department will be wanting to do programming in the large rooms and as well.
Back to you, Councilor Saunders.
I'd like to move the recommendation. As written-
One or both of them?
Both. As written in the agenda.
Moved by Councilor Saunders. Seconded by Councilor Getty. Any further discussion or debate? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Aye. And that carries unanimously. I was gonna make lots of changes to the vision statement, but I figured I'd just.
I forgot my comment is we've got 3 vision statements now, and I'm not sure which one's the right one, but anyhow.
Right, but just on a closing note of that piece, I know that the Joint Management Committee, all the staff, have been working really hard to get this done. So thank you to the members on the committee and for shepherding that through. And thank you to staff as well. Right on.
Thank you, Jan.
This is it.
Okay, we've just got a couple of items left. Moving on to section 11, new business, 11.1, update the Council on Metro Vancouver business. Just a couple of pieces out of the Metro Vancouver board meeting that was held recently on the 28th. The big news out of that meeting is that the board has elected Mike Hurley as the new chair of the Metro Vancouver board. A couple of interesting pieces that came out of the agenda. Our neighbors in Lions Bay are going to be hosting a research trial of ocean alkalinity enhancement, which is fairly neat in that they're going to be looking at removing carbon dioxide out of the ocean as a means of enhancing alkalinity as well as hopefully reducing ocean temperature. And I think was it on the Metro Vancouver agenda. Over to TransLink. TransLink's big announcements, June 27th meeting were the results of an efficiency review of TransLink management came back, and TransLink has announced that as part of their own cost savings measures, they sort of turned the lens on themselves, and they will be cutting $90 million out of their operations and capital budget. In a way, and they're going to be able to do this in a way that results in zero layoffs within the TransLink organization, which I think is pretty impressive. I believe that meeting is recorded. It was a fascinating presentation by the TransLink CEO. Those are the only pieces that I wanted to highlight, unless there's any questions. Councillor Wake?
Was there any comment on the potential service reductions? That?
Not yet. So, TransLink, on the Mayor's Council side, there's a pretty robust public and political engagement strategy that will unfold as part of the election that is really seeking to raise the alarm that TransLink is about to go off a fiscal cliff if it does not get its structural deficit sorted out. And then that will require both investment from provincial and federal levels of government. So we'd hope to hear the results of that. And we'll see more of that come out. So the other piece that was approved at this last Mayor's Council meeting was an approach on the 2025 investment plan. So as that investment plan gets developed, I would anticipate that any potential service reductions are going to come into sharper focus. My sense is that should service reductions need to be considered, I mean, the planners are going to have a tricky time figuring out whether we want to maintain coverage or maintain ridership. Coverage on the outlying areas would be a risk, particularly from Bowen Island. Seeing no questions, I will move on to an update from our Lone Islands trustee that's here today. So over to you, trustee.
Well, I'm not sure what Sue Ellen's been doing from Iceland, but I would assume very little, so I'll report as much as I can. At the last Trust Council meeting, we had a presentation from Adam Olson, who's with the MLA for many of the islands. And he pointed out that with the election coming up and potentially a change of government and the letters of instruction that go out to the new ministers, that this was a very important strategic time for us to think about specifically what we wanted to ask the province in terms of getting some help with increased jurisdiction and reduced resources. So like every other local community, we're trying to sort out what we want to ask the ministers and what we want to ask the government and what we want to strategize in terms of it becoming an election issue. So at the end of that Trust Council meeting, there's a very clear direction for the governance committee to do a first draft of renewing the letter to the province. And at the end of the last council, there was a letter that went to the minister, and it had 5 bullet points in terms of things that they wanted to have the minister look at in terms of the structure and whether or not it works effectively for the trust. 26 trustees, 13 different trust districts, all sorts of differences in size and population and housing needs and populations and what we wanted to have in terms of what we needed for help, either financial or support wise, in terms of the increased jurisdiction, because we've got large communities that are on the various islands that are responsive to and want to have us to have a much larger share in reconciliation and the recommendation from UNDRIP and the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and all of their recommendations. So there's an expectation that's getting handed down from the minister that they won't pass our bylaws or they won't agree to any bylaws unless we have taken on the consultation role. But there's, been $100,000 that's been given to us for the increased engagement. So it's trying to figure out how we can take on the extra jurisdiction. When we were on Salt Spring, there was a tour that, a very informal tour in terms of what was happening. And there's several islands where they're simply ignoring there are restrictions on trailers and housing. And so there's basically tent cities in behind alleyways and stores, and it looks like it's something that reminded me very much of Hong Kong, and people on temporary housing on the hillsides, and it's pretty dramatic. And they were talking about all sorts of horrendous things that were happening on all the boats in the harbor, and the dumping of raw sewage into the water, and a whole bunch of other issues that are coming up in terms of just an influx of people and no place to live on land, and all of the other things that they're doing. So they've got, and other islands have absolutely they've got an excess of housing in some of the little areas that are much farther north. So a range of problems. So we're going to have a working meeting of the governance committee coming up at the end of this week, and we're supposed to be focusing just on this letter to the ministry and some sort of a strategy for the trust over the summer in terms of the upcoming election. So we've put aside all of the other list of things that we're supposed to be working on, and we were sending out agendas and coming up with background materials, so hopefully people will read it and have some ideas. It's difficult with a group of people that aren't specialists and don't have any background in terms of governance issues and options and different things that could be trying, and we're in the middle of engaging a new CAO. So it's a great deal of work for very little time and ability, really. So we've got an interim CAO, and she's going to be very helpful, but it's a great deal of flux. The other thing that there's a new trust policy statement, and this has gone through several iterations. The last one that was published, I believe, in 2022, had a huge amount of feedback, a lot of it quite negative. So there's been a major rewrite. It's gone out to all of the different, I think there's 30 plus different First Nation peoples groups, and it's gone out to all of them for comment. We've got comment back from, I think, a little over a dozen, but very helpful, including Squamish, which was very interesting. And we had our first committee of the whole meeting to talk about that trust policy statement today, this morning, and most of it was closed because we'd had a legal opinion with respect to the draft, and we got a whole lot of feedback on that. So some of it is specific to an island municipality, and I want to get permission to be able to talk about that and with our group. But at this point, it's all in a closed meeting. So it has to be worked on before it gets published publicly. So we're trying to figure that one out as well. So lots happening with the trust, but nothing accomplished yet.
Thank you. Any questions for trustee? No? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to question period. Any folks online or from the throng of the press gallery that have any questions for us today?
And Alex hung in to the end.
Right, well, have another concept.
Seeing none, I will look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Getty, seconded by Councillor Wake. All in favor, raise your hands. Aye.
So can you please send me a link for the closed meeting? I gotta go get in the line. I gotta be from stores tonight, so.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, lucky me, and then I get to go to Terrace.
Right on.
It might be a little cooler because it's near the ocean.
Terrace is cooler, the rest. Port St. John, Dawson Creek, William Blake, Terrace.
Well,
Yeah, so I'm gonna go get in line and then I'll log in and I'll be able to sit in the meeting there, so.
Try and find a place on stage, because you'll have to.
I have air conditioning.
Always hot enough. you can run-
yeah, we'll take
So I just anyway. All right, see y'all later. Yeah, nice. Yes. Leaving.
looks like we're still streaming.
Thanks for the fans.